What's up, everybody? I'm Alan Seslowsky, and thanks for tuning back into RosterWatch. Each week on this video, we'll give you 3 players moving up and down the RosterWatch Startup Dynasty rankings. This week, we're going to start with Myles Gaskin, the running back on the Miami Dolphins, age 24, currently falling down our Dynasty rankings. Previous rank was RB24, current ranking is RB32. Gaskins was a pleasant surprise in 2020. Mostly undrafted in season-long leagues and likely dropped prior to the 2020 season in your modest-sized bench dynasty leagues. Don't hate yourself if you've dropped Gaskins in the summer of 2020. Miami had signed Jordan Howard at the time and proactively traded for Matt Breida, who was coming off a nice season in San Francisco the year before. Gaskin had the type of season in 2020 that we thought a player like Devin Singletary would have. A plug-and-play, every week RB2 with weekly upside to finish in the top 12. For the first half of the 2020 season, weeks 1 through 8, Gaskin was the RB17. Then he missed about a month of action, causing his seasonal ranking to drop. When Gaskin returned to action, he was productive, including a massive 35-point fantasy week in week 16. If you made it to the championship with Gaskin and plugged him in there, that was a huge advantage for you. Gaskin's lack of draft pedigree, along with his suboptimal size of around 200 pounds, are contributing factors to Gaskin's 8th-round startup ADP. RosterWatch had Gaskin ranked above ADP when we weighed the risk of his cost against the upside of him retaining his workhorse role. This week, news emerged from Miami Dolphin beat writers that they would be shocked if Miami didn't add a workhorse running back to the team. RosterWatch rankings pledge to stay relevant by adjusting to the conditions around us when they change. The news is concerning enough to drop him to about RB32 in our Dynasty Startup rankings, and until Miami actually drafts or signs a threat, we're going to keep him right amongst the low-end RB3 starters. Keep an eye on Gaskin's ADP. As news changes, we will adjust our rankings accordingly. The next player we're going to talk about is Tyreek Hill, age 27, the wide receiver on the Kansas City Chiefs. Previous rank was wide receiver 3. We've moved him to our wide receiver 1 in Dynasty Startup drafts. Even the slightest movement near the top of the Dynasty Startup rankings needs to be considered significant. Tyreek Hill, like I said, was our wide receiver 3, and now we've firmly moved him to the most coveted wide receiver in all of fantasy. We put our ranks to the test in a competitive startup draft recently where RosterWatch co-founder Alex Dunlap was sitting there with the 11th pick. After 10 straight running backs went off the board, Alex had his choice of any wide receiver he'd wanted to draft. When push came to shove, he confidently clicked draft on Patrick Mahomes' number 1 wide receiver. Hill is in the peak production age of 27 and is attached to the arm of Patrick Mahomes for the long term. The young rising stars like Justin Jefferson and DK Metcalf are worth consideration as the Dynasty wide receiver 1, but Hill's resume of banked production is of greater value than the age difference between Tyreek Hill and those other players. RosterWatch urges its readers to play Dynasty in 2 to 3 year windows versus the 5 to 6 year windows, especially with your first round pick. Tyreek Hill profiles as a player that should age well. His body type and game style traditionally have longer shelf lives than players of the past like Calvin Johnson and Andre Johnson. The last player we're going to talk about today is Antonio Gibson, the running back on the Washington football team, age 22, currently rising up our Dynasty rankings. Previous rank was running back 20. We've moved Antonio Gibson up to the running back 13. Antonio Gibson holds Golden Sun status within RosterWatch Nation. For those of you not familiar with this elite level of praise, it's comparable to knighthood. RosterWatch co-founders Byron Lambert and Alex Dunlap were literally the first to identify Gibson as a future fantasy star. Their boots-on-the-ground reports from the 2020 Senior Bowl had the whole fantasy industry buzzing. The pushback on Antonio Gibson at that time was that he was locked into a dreaded committee of 3 with Darius Geis and Adrian Peterson. Gibson quickly emerged to the top of the depth chart and became an RB1 for fantasy. After a monster 3-week run of fantasy production in weeks 10, 11, and 12, Gibson was injured and mostly was not usable for the rest of the fantasy season. The recency bias has put Gibson outside of the elite options for Dynasty startups, but now that we've had some time to reflect and digest everything that's happened in the season, it's time to add Antonio Gibson to the list of running backs that you should be proactively trying to draft in the top 15 overall picks. Okay, RosterWatch Nation, that's it for today. Remember to like and subscribe to get notifications when we go live, and leave us a comment in the video, and we will comment back. Until next time, goodbye.